When I did my recent 50 worst Mega Drive games list, I mentioned that there was one game that had to be replaced at the last minute, because I'd, rather surprisingly, ended up having quite a bit more fun with it than I thought I was going to. It came as a surprise having already played said game so many times and generally having terrible sessions with it over the years, and yet, something oddly clicked about what the title was trying to do, despite its many, many flaws. And yes, this is the game in question. It's Batman Forever. A fair few comments did wonder why Batman Forever didn't end up with a place in the Mega Drive's bottom 50, and that's the reason. I had a bit too much of a good time with it for it to get a spot. Now, I've got a long history with this game. I actually got it as a Christmas present back in 1995, along with a video of the movie, and I did spend quite some time playing and watching both, again despite everything. Sure, even back then the film was very iffy compared to the previous two, but I absolutely loved the hell out of Jim Carrey at the time, so I think I just watched it multiple times for him more than anything. And I played that game too, even if I well remember the ages spent at times trying to do the simplest of actions. For whatever reason, I still persevered. So I needed to dig deeper. Is Batman Forever a diamond in the rough, something worth looking at despite so many foibles and weaknesses? Or is it a digitised abomination that deserves all the scorn it gets and then some? In the words of Dan Bell, I had to find out. It's certainly been interesting to do so, and there have been some rather big surprises along the way, which we'll certainly be getting to. Developed by Probe Software and released by Acclaim, Batman Forever is obviously a game of its time in many ways. It's 1995, and these are still the days when digitised sprites get hyped up to high heaven. If you look at the blurbs and the promo video that exists for the game, included on certain VHS copies of the movie and on CD-ROMs, it's all about pushing the use of stuntmen from the movie, taking part in the process, and getting filmed in front of the requisite green screens, then superimposed on top of backgrounds that were actually shot on the film sets themselves, creating an experience that is entirely indiscernible from real life. Forget about any other caped crusader game you've seen before. Do they feature a bloke in an ill-fitting batsuit waddling about and throwing roundhouse kicks in front of a piece of fabric? No, they don't. Therefore they absolutely suck, and Batman Forever is the future. There's even hype for the technology this game's using, something called Ultimate Sign Fusion. Now this is actually a proper patented tech that purports to make green screen matting clearer than ever, and there's even raw video of a couple of the actors doing their thing that was found a few years ago on a once Acclaim-owned SGI computer by the YouTube channel Silicone Classics. Nearly 30 years of hindsight inform us that Batman Forever decidedly was not the future, and yet as an ardent fan of the likes of classic Mortal Kombat and what have you, I can't help but get somewhat nostalgic about digitised games like this. They represent a road not taken, a time when the industry was at something of a crossroads, with multimedia, interactive movies and digitised games on one path, and full 3D on the other. Obviously we know what won in the end, and decisively at that, but you've got to admire the big push, the rooms of the future filled with 3DOs and CDIs, the insistence that green screens and humans was what the people wanted to see. They failed, but it wasn't for lack of trying. I mean, just look at the commercial, one of the great cheesy artifacts of mid-90s game advertising. Over 80 stages, over 125 moves, it's got 3D graphics, it's got a freaking song where the vocalist, Rick Anthony, actually sings Batties. How could it not be brilliant?
He can fight with all his might and never win. When good battles evil, the real game begins.
The amount of bat moves at your bat disposal is in service of this being a true bat experience, one where you're going to be getting into proper scrapes with the enemies rather than it just being like any old fighter or platformer. As a member of the dev team says in the game's promo vid, you don't just need fighting skills, you need fighting smarts. You've got a whole load of gadgets that you can choose from, with the power to create even more if you find the blueprints that are hidden away in the game's levels, ranging from the basic Batarang to weapons such as goo guns that will stick thugs to the floor, or electric pellets that will give them a rather nasty shock. One of the dev team even claims that in the Bat universe they've created, you'll be able to go wherever you want, whenever you want. God damn. This is definitely a must-watch 90s promo vid, by the way. It's not quite up there with Bret Hart making the WrestleMania arcade game, a video that entirely justifies said title by its existence alone, but it sure is plenty cheesy. Now, the truth of the matter is that what Probe have done here is to take the engine used for Mortal Kombat 2's console ports and modified it severely in order to make more of a hybrid beat-em-up cum platformer. This is an approach that is going to cause several major issues, as we'll see when playing the game properly. For now though, it's so realistic that you're actually going to think that you're there. If I had 10 pence for every time I saw or heard that line in relation to a digitised game or interactive movie, I'd have at least £4 by now. Seriously, this whole promo is so 1995, it even tells you to sign up to a website and get no less than 10 free hours of America Online. So was Batman Forever the game that, as the promo says, the one Batman game people would want to play forever? Well, no, it wasn't. It may have a better claim to being the new standard by which video games are judged, but not in a good way. Critical opinion of the game is certainly pretty low nowadays, although it wasn't massively high then. GamePro particularly didn't have much good to say about it, calling it one of the year's most disappointing games. However, there's some quite positive reviews too. Mean Machine Sega, probably the biggest of all the Mega Drive specific UK publications, gave it a score of 90. To put this into context, and because I enjoy being harsh with old mags, that's 1 percentage point more than they gave Comic Zone in the same issue. In the main, they're full of praise for the game's depth and the amount of moves and gadgets that are at Batman and Robin's disposal. And to be fair, the game certainly isn't short on either of those things. Perhaps I don't want to subject poor old Gus and Marcus here to too much of the big bad game kosh. It's an October 95 issue, a review of one of just 4 Mega Drive games, part of an ever-dwindling 16-bit section that's fading out, replaced by the Saturn and, hell, even the 32X. You've got to try and shout a bit, haven't you? Still, 90%. I mean, come on. I suppose it's about time for the real game to begin, for that is the game's tagline, after all. Again, forget about all those fake Batman games you played before. This is where the real game begins. Naturally, I'm largely going to focus on the Mega Drive version of the game here, although there will be a little look at the other versions of Batman Forever later on, the ones for SNES, Game Gear, Game Boy, and PC-DOS. When you fire the game up, you get 2 options. The big old game itself, which you can play either in 1-player or 2-player, or something called the Training Mode. Training Mode is actually quite fun to screw around with. While you can obviously play as either Batman or Robin, you can also play as most of the game's enemies, and even Two-Face, and go up against 1 or 2 other foes. Personally, I think it's quite enjoyable to play as the Chainsaw Thug, seeing as he has lots of special moves ranging from drilling down into the ground, riding along on his saw, or flat out chainsawing his enemies square in the nether regions. Once you start Training Mode, you fight the same enemies you've picked over and over, and they go up a level in aggression each time. There are around 30 or so levels of aggression, and they will eventually reach a point where they're so aggressive and read your input so much that they can become virtually impossible to beat. Still, this Training Mode is kinda fun regardless. As befits its origins, it turns Batman Forever into a Mortal Kombat-esque fighting game. Still, eventually, you're going to want to see what the main game itself is all about. So let's go ahead and do that.
If the Bat wants to play, we'll play.
You take your pick from either Bruce Wayne or Dick Grayson and get straight on with the first level. Two-Face has broken out of Arkham Asylum and you've got to sort things out. Now, a lot of people's Batman Forever experience goes like this. You beat up a couple of inmates in the first screen, then move right to the next one. Beat up a couple more inmates and then... it's a dead end. You can see that there's a level up above you, but how do you reach it? Every button, every possible combination is hammered in desperation. You can have Batman fire his hook diagonally, but how do you do it vertically? Just how? This is where so many people's experience of Batman Forever comes to a sudden halt, the great puzzle of going up a frickin' level, and it's even more of a pain to go back down. I watched Speedrunning's own dynamic duo, PJ and Clage, play through the SNES version of this game at an AGDQ in 2017, and PJ mentioned that when he first played Batman Forever, he couldn't get past this part for a whole year. It's the sort of thing where you just frickin' mash buttons in vain. You may eventually do the magic combination of pressing Y and up at not quite the same time, but it won't have entered your head if you do it purely through mashing. Batman Forever does have a lot of controls, likely far more than any other 16-bit platformer, and while messing around with some of them is actually kinda fun, as we'll see, there are other parts where, well, this sort of thing is the result. Of course, a lot of these controls come from the game being based on Mortal Kombat 2's engine. The game being MK adjacent was plainly obvious to anyone who played the title back then, even if it wasn't actually mentioned much in the game's pressers. However, the fighting game origins does mean that the game commits one of the cardinal sins of platforming. It is, of course, up to jump. While years of playing, or probably more accurately, enduring one-button Euro platformers on the Amiga, ZX Spectrum and what have you, mean that up to jump has little to no effect on me, it's obviously something that the majority of gamers utterly despise, and for damn good reason. One errant press can lead to a jump when you didn't want to, and unnecessary jumping really isn't something you want to do in this game. Not only does it lead to falling deaths that should have been easily avoidable, it can even lead to situations where jumping with an enemy's attack wipes out your health bar instantly because suddenly you're missing all your iframes. These are not good things to happen in a game with 8 levels that starts you out with 6 lives and gives you absolutely no continues. Hell, if you're playing this in 2-player, you don't even get your own lives. You're sharing those 6 lives. It should probably be stressed by now that, no, I am not about to say that Batman Forever is a good game. It really is not. This is more to see if there was a bit more potential there, if there's some positives to be gleaned out of the general mess of this title, or if it does truly deserve to be consigned to, as I'm oh so fond of saying, the ranks of the damned. And yes, I do say that in full awareness of my roticism. One of the amusing things about the promo video for Batman Forever, and indeed for a lot of similar games, is deciphering the hyped up lines to figure out what they actually mean, such as the claim that you can go wherever you want and whenever you want. In this instance, the translation is that most of Batman Forever's levels are mazes where you can indeed go anywhere at any time, although for the most part you probably wouldn't want to. Getting lost in this game can be something of a pain, and the only reason you'd ever have for going somewhere you've already been is to try and find a secret area, most of which you usually get clues for thanks to the Riddler's riddles. Once you figure out the grappling hook mechanic, the first of these levels is, at least, kind of linear. Mostly you're just going left to right, so it's mainly about beating up the inmates and figuring out the basics of fighting. Now, combat is one of the things that Batman Forever does decently on, mainly because, again, Batman and Robin have a lot of moves and you're encouraged to play with them. The roll is one you're going to use a lot. It's the best for getting out of being surrounded, which you really don't want to be. A lot of the war damage comes from grabs. Both Batman and Robin do this strange neck snappy attack that seems to be way more painful than most anything else they can do. To me it looks more like they're leaning in to give the thugs a big old smooch. Other than that, you've got punches, uppercuts, throws and kicks that are pretty much ripped straight from Mortal Kombat. Some of these can have their uses as well, although particularly on the Mega Drive I find some of the throws very tricky to pull off. There's an attack where you can do the classic Batman noggin knocker on 2 thugs, but being between 2 thugs is the absolute worst thing because you just get chinned to hell, losing your health very quickly unless you get out fast. Not something you want with lives being so limited. In the end, much like Mortal Kombat, one of the best regular things you can do is a good old-fashioned uppercut straight to the chin. That, at the least, is a guaranteed chunk of damage, especially if you've stunned the enemy beforehand. Another one of the foibles here, again, comes from this being essentially a fighting game. You don't just walk up to enemies and start hitting or turn left and turn right. You target enemies, with there being a subtle difference in speed between regular walking and combat mode. Generally you target whoever you're closest to, although it can go a bit haywire when you've got those goons on either side of you, in ways you don't expect from a regular old action game that can easily throw you off, make you miss shots and strikes, and get you wiped out if you're not used to it. But then, this is Batman Forever, so you should expect the unexpected, even if the unexpected isn't very good. As you might have already figured, Batman Forever is brutally difficult. It's very easy indeed to die quickly, and there is no continues. Happily, there is a level select code so you can go back to where you died, but there are times when, well, you might not want to do that either, as we'll see. As we get into the second level here, the bank, which is basically another maze, only slightly bigger, but still generally a matter of getting on the floor, cleaning it up, and then going back to the elevator, it's worth looking at one of the more fun things about the game. All those gadgets. If I can give Batman Forever credit for something, it's possibly the first Bat game where you're really able to screw around and use a wide variety of gadgets with reckless abandon. You pick a loadout for each stage, and from there you can use them as much as you want, triggering them with special move and fatality combos that are, again, ripped straight from Mortal Kombat. For example, you use Batman's Batarang or smoke pellets with quarter circle movements, although both are kind of useless in all honesty. The gadgets also represent the biggest difference between picking Batman or Robin, seeing as both have their own specialised tools, and it is here where, truthfully, if you want to get anywhere in this game, you better grit your teeth and think about picking Chris O'Donnell. He may have that silly staff, and his in-game suit may look more like it's straight out of the 60s TV series than anything that was actually in the movie, but Robin sure does have the tools for success. While a lot of these gadgets are honestly kind of worthless, if amusing to use, Robin has a couple that are damn near broken. His Sonic Blast is one of the very best stun weapons, immobilising enemies for a very useful second, although it's far more powerful in the SNES version, and his heat gun is probably the only offensive projectile worth anything. This actually does a decent bit of damage. If you're able to get the Bat Cuffs, either by getting the blueprints or other means, that's by far the best gadget of the lot. It stuns every enemy for a good few seconds, giving you plenty of time for a powerful grab, uppercut, heat gun or whatever. Now I must confess that I am cheating a bit in order to use these, but frankly you take any opportunity you can to get an advantage in this fricking game. Most of the other gadgets are kind of useless, but they can at least be fun. Creating a holographic Batman for an enemy to pointlessly wail away on, or using a homing Batarang that does look rather cool, but again does so little damage that you may as well be booping your opponent. Another rather fun blueprint gadget is the rocket boots. This launches our hero straight forward, Raiden style, for a big old push. This does actually do damage, although the complex button combo and risk of screwing yourself by doing it does cancel that out somewhat. You may also have noticed by this point that all the enemies are named. Batman Forever actually has a ton of names for all the thugs, with very few of them actually repeating. One amusing Easter egg is that in the last section of level 2, the big helicopter ride on top of the safe, all the thugs are named after England International Rugby Union players. You may spot the likes of Mike Catt, Steve Ajomu, Rob Andrew, Jeremy Guscott. That's kind of funny at least. Moving on to level 3 brings us to the circus, the game's only timed level. You've got to get to the top of the big top and defuse the explosives, and if you don't do it, the whole game is over. Playing this level is chronologically weird if you're Robin, seeing as this is where the Flying Graysons get wiped out, but here we are. Anyway, this sort of maze is a good opportunity to talk about another irritation. A lot of your time is going to be spent walking aimlessly around a stage looking for the enemy spawns, because they kind of happen all over the place, and usually you need to defeat every enemy before the door unlocks to the next one. When you're under a time limit, this can especially be annoying, and getting knocked off here also represents a threat. There's also a very hilarious bug here, which I found out through watching PJ and Clager's speedrun. Say you were to beat this stage, go on to beat the whole game, and for whatever reason think, that was brilliant, let's do it all over again. Well, when you reach the third stage, the timer actually doesn't reset. You would start with whatever time you had left when you defused the bomb the first time around, likely rendering the stage impossible. Brilliant! Even better, if you were to run out of time and then go straight in for another one, again, when you get to the third stage, well, there's no time left. You just automatically get a game over. True quality on display here, viewers, I'm sure you'll agree. In every case, if you ever want to do another one of this game, you're going to want to at least do a hard reset first. I'm not sure if this bug is in the Mega Drive version, but it's certainly one of the many great things about Batman Forever. The fourth level takes us to Two-Face's hideout in a warehouse and, geez, it's a fair old mess. There's a couple of funny things here. First is how enemies react when you get them into the damage pits in this level and others. They're introduced in level 4. When they're in there, they are all but dead, seeing as they can't usually jump up, but it can take ages depending on how much health they've got. They get like a sliver of damage each time. You may be tempted to stand on the edge and gloat a bit, but don't, because they can still hit you even here. This stage also features one of the more infamous parts of the game, for those who actually managed to get this far. The second to last room where you need to hit all the switches. Getting to them can be kind of obtuse. You automatically swing on these bars, and there's one where you actually have to jump at the bar from the opposite direction of where you want to go. Bloody hell, guys. Give us a break already, will ya? Once you do that, you reach the first proper boss of the game. First you take out Two-Face's accomplices, Sugar and Spice, before taking on everyone's favourite disgraced former district attorney. Sugar and Spice aren't too difficult, but Two-Face can be a frickin' nightmare. You can only damage him by naturally hitting him in the face, and getting up close exposes you to all of his heavy-hitting attacks. Also, he can, at literally any point, flip a coin and regenerate his entire health bar. Lovely! The only thing to do really is to relentlessly spam the bat cuffs or the slippery goo, followed by the heat gun, and hope for the best. To be honest, this is pretty much the only good approach as we get later in the game. Naturally, the enemies only get tougher, and because this is essentially a fighting game disguised as a platformer, particularly a Mortal Kombat based one, the enemy AI is absolutely chock full of input reading hard counters, and they'll only get more frequent. Spamming the absolute hell out of bat cuffs, sonic blast or any other stun move you've got is the best bet. Do that, then it's either uppercut, heat gun or the kiss of death. Any other approach is honestly close to useless by the time you get to around level 5 or so. Now, if you told me that at some point I'd be writing this many words about Batman Forever, I'd have probably laughed in your face. But it turns out there's a lot of detail to talk about. Even if I do almost get a kick out of it, there are so many things that make this such a bad title, and we'll find even more of that in the 5th level, the Ritz. This can be the shortest level, but a lot of that's really down to either pure luck or absolutely ludicrous reactions. A lot of it consists of hitting switches, opening trapdoors, ideally sending goons to a quick death through them and absolutely not falling through them yourself. Because to paraphrase the Ramones, you don't want to go down into the basement. Any fall will take you there, the place is filled with the Riddler's thugs, a new and rather powerful enemy, and it's very easy to do. So even if this level is actually only about 4 rooms, it can take a lot longer. The second to last room, on the girders, is another hilarious one. Said girders will randomly, quickly, and utterly artlessly blow up, naturally sending you to the basement if you're on them. If you don't know exactly when this is going to happen, falling back to the basement is surely unavoidable. The rather minimalistic way it all happens is kind of hilarious, mind. Remember, it looks so real that you're going to actually feel like you're there. The last room features your first encounter with Edward Nygma himself, the Riddler. Compared to Two-Face, the normal Riddler isn't too hard. Again, you just do the spamming thing. His main trick is spawning his goons to run interference, which is very annoying indeed. Not because they're any tougher, mind you, but because the text on their name is centre aligned rather than left aligned like everyone else's. Now I find this to be 1,000 times more infuriating than anything else I've seen in the game so far. The 6th level, the subway, isn't the most overtly offensive out there and is pretty linear, although it does feature a rather annoying section when you actually get on the tracks themselves. Not only must you avoid the sparks on the tracks, but obviously you've got to avoid the train when it comes. Funny thing is, the train only has a hitbox at the very front. Once you've passed that, feel free to stand up and carry on doing whatever it was that you were doing. The 7th level, Destroyed Batcave, is also pretty short and simple and is at least decent looking, so it gives us a little chance to talk about the graphics. Mostly they're okay. It's pre-rendered backgrounds all the way here, and they could generally be described as nice if generic. Sometimes they have a little bit of movement going on, but generally speaking they are kind of lifeless. You get some foreground stuff going on too. This is much the same with the added bonus of it occasionally getting in the way, and the animation, I think you've seen a lot of that. All of that budget went on capturing the actors and not much else. The music and sound is unfortunately quite lacking. A couple of the themes aren't too bad, but others are very irritating and, again, very flat sounding with not much life going at all. Plus the quality of the speech samples is atrocious. Now I'm sure many people have said this is a typical bad Western Mega Drive Gems soundtrack, but it's actually not Gems at all, it's Probe's own sound driver. In fact, the person who made the music for this game? No less a figure than Tim Follin, one of the greatest game music composers of all time. While Follin is largely famous for 8-bit soundtracks, he made some good stuff in the 16-bit era too. Sadly, certainly here on the Mega Drive anyway, this is not a monstrum. We'll get back to the music later though. Anyway, we're at the final level, Claw Island. Once again you've got a straight passage to the end, but we still have one more absolutely hideous puzzle. The Riddler's switches. This is similar to the levers from the warehouse stage, except these switches don't permanently stay on. You have to get them quickly, and you also have to contend with disappearing bars to swing on. It's the sort of thing that might not ordinarily be too bad, but when paired with this game's controls for jumping and gliding, it's a nightmare. The only slight reprieve is that this room isn't exactly crawling with enemies. Anyway, once you finally do this, you enter the last sequence. You fight 2 Riddler holograms and then the Riddler himself in a room full of question marks. Of course, you've kind of done this already, so there's really not that much to say here. The last room of the game sees you meet with Two-Face for the second time. Harvey is even stronger than before, has even more attacks, and he can still heal himself. To be honest, Dent is kind of easily the strongest enemy in the game, even compared to what's up next. Taking out Two-Face for good leads you straight into the Big Riddler, a huge claymation creation, double the size of anything else you've faced. Predictably for this game, the fight is a mess. The collision detection is all over the shop, and he can grab you for a Bane-esque backbreaker even when he's quite clearly nowhere near you. Still, he is quite vulnerable to the heat gun, especially seeing as you can even hit him with it when he's on the ground. He'll just magically get up and be whacked with it. No frames of animation or anything. The only trouble is that Big Riddler really breaks the game's targeting system, so you have to be in just the right spot to actually fire the damn thing, which can still be quite annoying. Who had the idea of making a platform game out of a fighting game again? When you finally defeat this big old monster, it's still not over. You have to take on the regular Riddler just one more time, who is kind of a breeze after all that, seeing as he doesn't spawn thugs anymore. Eventually you take his health down to 0 and he falls over. He's so thoroughly chinned that his body even stays on the screen, meaning that there's just one more thing we really have to do here. Once we're satisfied, you walk up to Dr. Chase Meridian, free her, and we're done. And what's your reward for all of this, you may ask? A single screen congratulating you, saying that the game's complete. Did you really expect anything else? It's akin to the dentist finally telling you to please rinse at the end of a particularly taxing root canal. So what are my thoughts on Batman Forever? It is, well, to say the least, a massively flawed game. A bad game, for sure. Just about every level has something about it that truly makes you shake your head in disbelief and wonder why they thought it was a good idea. From the obtuse exits to the highly questionable grappling hook controls, those damn warehouse switches to that girder section in the Ritz, the endless searching for enemies in the bank to the disappearing bars on Claw Island. As mentioned previously, these things may have worked better if this was a more ordinary sort of action platformer. But Batman Forever is anything but. Essentially, this is a game that's trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, trying to hammer this fighting engine into a place where it really doesn't belong, regardless of how much damage it's actually doing. And yet, I don't necessarily hate it. I do kind of appreciate how it's trying to add a whole load of depth when it comes to the combat and moves that are at your disposal in a game like this, even if it goes about it in the most ham-fisted way possible with one-on-two fights that certainly do get repetitive well before the game's end. It's trying to do something novel, even if it's also trying to do something that most would consider stupid. Somewhat amusingly, I can see building blocks in this late 16-bit game that would go into a whole load of other stonkingly mediocre Western 3D games over the next few years, usually those of the licensed variety, whether it's the rather sludgy, dark and artless nature of its presentation, or its lumbering and overcomplicated controls. There are times, whenever there's actually a bit of flow in the fighting, where maybe, just maybe, you sense that a more careful touch and solid pair of hands on the till would have produced something better. Although maybe, considering how much more fun the training mode is than the regular game, Batman Forever might actually have just been better off as a straight-up fighting game. That surely would have ended up better, although perhaps not quite as memorable as the video game Frankenstein's Monster that Probe and Acclaim ended up creating. It is a total failure, make no doubts about it, but there is still something about it that makes it stick in the memory. It's one of the quintessential titles of the transitional period between the 16 bits and the 32 bits, even if that does not in any way signal anything positive. Before we finish up here though, well, I did want to have a look at the other versions of Batman Forever quickly, seeing as I've only ever properly played the Mega Drive one. We have the SNES, PC-DOS, Game Gear and Game Boy, and some of them certainly have their own specialised characteristics, particularly the Super Nintendo, which naturally we'll be looking at first. We'll start off with some positives here, although we will be brief. Firstly, the presentation is nicer here on the whole. You do get a few little extras, such as the touch of Mode 7 that greets you on the mission briefing, seeing the dot of the Batmobile scurrying around the city streets to the next level, or a reflection of Batman as he scans his gadgets and what have you. That's nice, isn't it? Oh, and the music is nicer here too. Seeing as the tunes in this game are going for a bit more of an orchestral feel, they definitely fit the SNES a lot better than they do the Mega Drive. So, that's something. As for negatives, well, the game is completely and utterly broken, I'm afraid. I mean, geez, I didn't think the controls on the Mega Drive version were all that hot, but they were amazing compared to the Super Nintendo version. I tend to see a lot more of the serious vitriol against Batman Forever coming from SNES owners as opposed to Mega Drive owners, and playing this version I can absolutely see why. I mean, we only had the utterly middling Sunsoft Batman Returns game as the previous Batmovie title before this one on Mega Drive. Imagine going from Konami's classic console beat-em-up to this bloody wreck. Now, if there's one thing that SNES Batman Forever is infamous for, it's those two little words. Hold on. It's not an impromptu tribute to Wilson Phillips, but it is something that greets you every time you enter another part of a level. This is one of the few SNES games that has a noticeable loading screen. Others that also have visible load times include Lock-On and Street Fighter Alpha 2. The Mega Drive version doesn't have any of that, so chalk one up to glass processing, I guess. Anywho, this isn't the main reason why SNES Batman Forever is so bad. As mentioned, the controls are so much worse. One of the more infamous examples here is that you actually have to press the select button to use the grappling hook, something that you'd have probably never guessed if you didn't consult, or as was often the case, didn't have, especially if you were renting it for example, the game's manual. That is a majorly illogical step, but still not the biggest problem. Everything else is knackered too. It's tricky to explain, but say you want to throw a Batarang, you kind of have to perform the commands in increments. Down, split-second pause, forward, split-second pause. Why? Otherwise it doesn't work. You don't have to do this on Mega Drive. There you can just use a nice fluid quarter-circle motion, same as if you were playing Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat. Not so here. And this applies to so many other things like doing rolls, using any gadget, all the grabs. It is completely and utterly balked, and it makes fights hellish. I largely stopped even bothering trying to do the special moves in the end. So even if the game may look and sound marginally nicer here on the SNES, it is the worst version by a considerable distance. Just completely dreadful. And I could easily see myself featuring it on a list of the worst games on the platform, whenever that ends up happening. Up next, we have the PC-DOS version. This is perhaps the most surprising because, in all honesty, if there is anything close to a definitive version of Batman Forever, this is probably it. Or at least, it's certainly the one with the most bells and whistles. Said bells and whistles are mostly the sort of thing you wouldn't have any hope of getting on the Mega Drive or SNES, such as CGI videos, ultra-clear speech and sound, or proper CD quality music. Now of these, the CD quality music is by far the best thing. Suddenly, Tim Follin's Batman Forever soundtrack is a whole lot better than it ever was before. Turns out it actually did have some proper potential. We get a lot more voices here too, and those also turn out to be more fun. In particular, the various riddles are now read out nicely. It's not Jim Carrey, but whoever's reading them is certainly having a good time.
If you should bring a quad of these prints, a prize will be yours to make criminals win.
As for the action itself, it's a whole lot faster, certainly not sluggish, and the sprites are much clearer as you would expect them to be, so that's all very welcome. At least the game now moves at a pretty nice clip. Also, they are different. In particular, Robin's combat suit now actually looks like the one he's got in the bloody movie, which it never did before. Batman's suit is also changed. He's now wearing the Sonar Batsuit, the prototype introduced near the end of the film. This is a shame, to be honest, mainly because the Sonar Batsuit doesn't feature those utterly infamous and ridiculous bat nipples, and the graphics are far too grainy and low-res for them to appear in the console versions. What a swizz! Still, both our heroes and everyone else do have quite a lot more animation now, which is nice. Now, don't get me wrong, in the end, this is still Batman Forever. The controls are still utterly all over the place, being that they're a mix of joystick and keyboard actions, and it's not helped by a dreadfully written manual. Seriously, you'll want to burn the bloody thing when you actually figure out how to drop down a level, and I still have a whole lot of trouble doing anything here beyond the regular moves, which is pretty damn annoying. If you want an extended look at people suffering with these DOS controls and generally becoming more indifferent to the ideal of life, I recommend checking out the almighty John and Audi playing this version for DF Retro, which I'll link to in the description. Still, it is nice to see Batman Forever here in a way that's closer to how it was supposed to look. It should be noted that there is also a PC-DOS version of the Batman Forever arcade game, a totally different beast that we're not covering, although it is also pretty crap for its own reasons. And hey, don't forget to claim those 10 free hours of America Online. Finally, we have our two handheld versions, Game Boy and Game Gear. Both of these versions are pretty similar aside from the obvious differences between the platforms, and naturally you can expect severe cutbacks. There's no Robin to be found at all here, seeing as it's single player only, and half the levels have been cut out. You get 4 two-part levels starting with Bank, then going to Circus, Subway, and finally Claw Island. Still, gameplay-wise, well, it's certainly faithful, that's for sure, although I leave it to you to decide whether that's a good fin or not. They've tried their best to fit all the controls onto 2 buttons and a D-pad, that's for sure. The majority of moves are still available, in much the same way that they're also available in, I don't know, the Game Boy version of Mortal Kombat 2, in that naturally they're a total pain to execute. The music is rather bad here, again, and yeah, this just ends up being very dull. It's kind of hard to keep the energy up for the fights because they all just take too much time, and it's not like you're really scrambling all that much. I mean, it's easier than the regular versions, but who's all that bothered? It's all very mediocre indeed, exactly as you would expect. If you had to play one of these versions though, I would go for the Game Boy one because it does, to my feelings at least, move just that little bit smoother. And, well, we're just about finished here. Making a strange hybrid game like Batman Forever was, at the very least, a different sort of idea, even if it wasn't a good one. Some other games that followed on it in the next couple of years kind of bore that out, at least in 2D. Batman Forever does kind of go hand in hand with Midway's Mortal Kombat Mythology's Sub-Zero, seeing as both are essentially singing from the same hymn sheet, and both of them quite simply don't work out in the end. I suppose nostalgia has a bit to do with the slight fondness I can't help but have for Batman Forever in the end. One of the reasons why I decided to not just flat out brutalise it, and instead at least give it the honour of approaching it on its own terms, and going into more detail as to why it ends up falling so short of the mark. But then, it is also interesting in how it fails, far more so than so many other more cookie-cutter licensed games of the day. Even if a huge part of that interest comes from seeing all the ways they managed to screw it up. In any case, hopefully you've enjoyed this look back at this particular instance of the Big Black Bat. Until next time, bye for now.